Good morning. Okay, good morning. I made some notes today because I do want to talk about disability and work and what it's like to work my body up to being capable of working and how long I've been doing that for. And we'll leave schooling aside for a second and we'll just talk about work. And then I will also be talking about schooling, being physically disabled at school eventually, and then even eventually after that I'm going to be integrating the two experiences and talking about what it's like to grow up physically but invisibly disabled. So what it means when I was growing up in my own body was that I thought that what I experienced in my body was normal. And so being able to name pain was my first obstacle to getting any help because I could not name it. I didn't know what it was because I was in it. All right. And all right, so my very, very, very first job that I got was as a candy striper, which is a volunteer at the hospital. And I was 13 and I was just old enough to volunteer because I was bored during the summer, and I just actually read my diary from that year. Started in the beginning of June, I think, of the year I was 13, turning 14. Oh boy. That was an adventure. To reread that was a whole heartbreak again and again and again. Of course, now I have to process all that information, and this is part of that. So, yes, I was old enough to do something with myself, but not old enough to be paid. So I had to do a volunteer job, and I didn't want to do any babysitting because I didn't know any children. And I was born at the leading edge of my mother's generation of mothers. All right, so like she was alone mothering. She was the first in her group of friends for like a decade. So that meant that my child experience was that I was the only child around ever anywhere until school. Hang on. So how I got my candy striper job was that I psyched myself up. I was like, I didn't want to be bored all summer. And I misunderstood my very, very best friend at the time because I didn't know that she wanted to get a job together with me and that we could work together in the same job. Like, I didn't even know that was possible. I knew that she wanted a job, I wanted a job, we were both gonna go. And one day I was just like, all of the stars collided and I was able to do all the things and go to the hospital and fill out the volunteer form and like do all the steps and get my little uniform. All right, I cannot remember if it was an actual candy stripe pink uniform. I think it was, which thrilled me, or I replaced that in my mind with the image because it's thrilling. And one of my favorite series of books growing up was the Nancy Drew series, and there was also a related series of books called the Cherry Ames series, and she was a nurse and she solved mysteries and had adventures, and I thought she was just the prettiest and smartest and coolest little thing in the world, and I wanted to be just like her, right? So there I was in my little pinstripe uniform feeling like a character, but it was late in the season for filling out the volunteer form. I had no idea of these things, right? There was like a process. I didn't know. I just walked into the hospital and said, I'd like to volunteer, please. So I got my volunteer position, and I was a waitress and in the coffee shop. and actually it was a little snack counter, and there was a little grill, and so the waitresses were the volunteers, and the cooks were paid. So I was part of the service crew, and we were, as such, because we were volunteers, we're not paid, but we were also not allowed to keep our tips. Our tips were for research and for, charity. So, but it was my first working experience. And I remember being like, oh, I'm not even going to have pocket money from the tips. But I made the commitment and I signed the contract that I was, going to give my time, and so I'm going to do what I said I was going to do, because even at 13 years old, I was a pretty moral little kid, I was, and there was no reason not to be. You see, that's the natural human tendency, is towards positive, good, honest, and open-hearted communication and connection with others. And being able to do all that is just means that you do what you say you're going to do, and you treat others the way you yourself want to be treated. It's simple. And I was doing it, right? Even though, like, I had to make some self-sacrifice and not keep any tips. It was fine, And I had many wonderful experiences, and I also had a negative experience where I made a friend and I found a boyfriend somehow. And this boyfriend was icky. He was really, he attached himself to me, and he was always touching me in ways I did not really appreciate. But I had no boundaries. I wasn't able to say no, right? So at that age, you can imagine, I was just like a still pool of water, but a clear, fresh, like a mountain lake. And he was just getting in there, and there was nothing to be done, right? So yeah, that's the problem with innocence and purity, is that keeping it too long, keeping children unwise and uneducated about their rights in a relationship, right? So that it just starts with their bodies, right? Their rights to their bodies. And I did not have that. And there's a myriad reasons why. And chronic pain, untreated, unrecognized and untreated, is one of the reasons why psychologically I did not understand where my body begins and ends. And because I lived in my mind and dissociated from my body as much as I could, as an act of coping with being in pain all the time. And oh boy, what a cascade. It was tough. All right, so I got out of that job and I tried to rid myself of that boyfriend. And I managed it in a terrible way. I made a bad plan that worked. It was effective, but it further damaged me. Like, I was further invaded, Ugh. All right, but let's stay at the jobs. Let's forget about the boys. That was not a good time. All right, so my second job I got for myself the following summer, and it was as a barista. I was a barista at a local chain of coffee shops, and it was a very popular one next to a movie theater that was open late. So there were two distinct kind of cultures in that coffee shop. And I started with the young folk at night, in the night shift, but I am physically disabled and I need a lot of sleep, and I cannot be upright anymore. In the afternoons, I'm toast, done. And when I was a kid, I was still needed like a good 2-3 hour nap in the afternoon if I was going to like go work a shift from like 8 to midnight and close until 2, you know? So, right, the candy stripe job before that I found very difficult because my ankles were very loose at that age and floppy still, and they would often, I would walk and they'd flop out, flop out, flop out. So I was very like, I was always catching myself, you know, in these jerky movements that carrying like a lot of stuff. And plus I was undiagnosed ADHD as well. And I remember finding it extremely difficult to be able to write quickly and efficiently. I thought I had to invent my own shorthand, that it would just come naturally. Not something that I had to like study and then employ so that I could then improve my skills. You know, I was just like making notes that I couldn't then read because I was anxious and in a rush and trying not to spill everything on my way back. It was a disaster. So I knew that going to the table, taking the order, putting it in the short order cook's lineup, which I constantly misunderstood their own little way. This, you put these tickets up and they stick on the thing. It was a mystery to me. I had no idea how they even did that. There's nothing magnetic. I couldn't understand it. You know? And they had their own system, like I'm doing this group and I'm doing that group and and I had to go and put my ticket in the middle of it because I didn't see the system, you know? So, yeah. Not easy to work with unless I was given a direct, clear verbal instruction, which I would willingly do until I got tired or I fell. Hurting myself once a shift, normal. All right, so a barista doesn't do as much walking. I figured, okay, I'm going to be standing, but I'll be behind the cash and then near the coffee machine. Like it's a much more contained, physically doable, I thought, thing. But I ran into being on your feet. Just the being on your feet was too much for me. It was really hard, really painful. At that job, the night crew were stealing tips. And not only stealing tips, but then stealing small orders, like just not putting in the small coffee, making change through the tip jar, and then clearing the machine so that it didn't register, but the customer would still hear a song and dance in the machine and then think that everything was fine. And when I saw that that's what was happening, I was really disturbed. You know, like I did do the not put the coffee in the register and put it in the tips a few times, but it didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't justify it because the tips in the end were still being divided among those who were on the shift. But there was sometimes huge and dramatic differences. Like when there was one person in particular on the cash, the tips would overflow and be refilled and refilled and refilled, the bowl that we used, but it never seemed that what we got at the end of the night was any different. So I was like, she's just plain stealing all the tips too, you know? That gang tried to like make me their friend and show me that it was okay, and I just couldn't. Plus, being up at night was hard on me. So I switched to the morning shift, dawn, like baking, the cozy shift, right? Where all the motherly types were, where they all had like kids in high school nearby and were like making a new life and a better life for themselves, you know? Mostly from parts of Latin America, speaking Spanish. Again, I was excluded. One of the busboys tried to kiss me while I was trying to get into my shirt in the changing corner, which was barricaded with like not even a real wall, just a kind of you know, those standing accordion door looking things. Okay, so yeah. That happened, but I needed the money. I thought I needed the money of my job, so I didn't want to report him, get into trouble, be again on the outside. He's not going to go anywhere. This is his life, you know. So, yeah, I think I got one of the mom types to intercede on my behalf that, like, no, she really is shy. She's not flirting with you. Like, stop trying to grab her. Um, at that time, I did make friends with French people more, and I was happy there. It was good, but I had this weird sense that I had to quit. Um, I'm not 100% sure why that happened. Oh, yes, now I do remember. Okay, I did have to quit because I had a mental breakdown. There you go. See, there's always something of value going back to the early days, of stuff. I forgot that that was the reason why. So it really did affect me, that mental breakdown, in my work life too. And the reason I had a mental breakdown was, again, complex. But at the end of that diary, I had gotten rid of the awful boyfriend, and then but I had done it by being promiscuous and hurting him, which again was not a way that I wanted. It was just effective. And I felt kind of like I had to. And I also felt that because I was in denial about my sexuality, that I had to kind of prove that I wasn't broken by the sexual abuse that had happened in my childhood. And so I wasn't allowed to be a safe lesbian because I had been sexually abused. And I thought that that's what those feelings that I was having meant. And I didn't understand that it was actually much deeper. One's sexuality is much deeper than abuse, and that abuse was just obscuring my clear sexuality. It was very clear, always, from before the abuse. It was very clear that I was on team lesbian, absolutely, 100%. I can tell a lot of anecdotes, but I'm not going to. So, but at that barista job when I was 15, I was in denial, and I was forcing myself to say yes to all opportunities, and not realizing that heterosexual boys are animals. They're not yet clear-minded. They have not controlled their baser impulses at all. And so that was a bad plan. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do not. I cannot say it enough times. How bad it is to not have boundaries. Before one can merge with another being, I had to understand who I was, because I had no choice but to merge with other people, because I didn't have any value. I didn't have any uniqueness. I didn't know anything about myself, right? Because I was always trying to please an adult as a child, always. It's unfortunate, but it was the way it was. And that kind of trauma is invisible and slow. And now we know what groups of people are likely to be experiencing it, and we need to go and say, hi, we see you now. You can talk. It's safe. Come out. We're listening. I'm listening. So if you have experienced things like me, it's okay to talk to me. I am listening to you. If I don't respond in the comments with anything else but a thumbs up or a heart, I still think about you every day, and I listen. Okay, so physically too hard of me, the barista job, and morally too hard on me, and I needed to leave my life downtown and escape at the end of my mental breakdown. So I went to my grandmother's house. I went to Granny's house to get fixed, and she rescued me. Well, she did her best. I still had a good 10 years left of suffering, you know? But that's okay. All right, she got me my third job as a cashier at the restaurant where she worked for the previous 25 years and was still working. We worked together. It was great. I really loved that. Again, I had no boundaries, but I was much better. I was under supervision, and just knowing that my granny was there and that we were going to drive home together made me so much better, and that it was a family atmosphere. So in the older days, being part of a service industry team meant something. It meant that you were part of a certain class, a working class of people. And working class people are family people. And the reason for that is because family helps family even when there's no material goods. Okay? We keep each other's hearts alive. We support and sustain one another's spirits. Working class people have no other choice but to rely on people in their close entourage, who they're working with. All right? And I learned that. If I already knew it, but that it cemented in my heart. Now, unfortunately, I had to move out of my granny's place because my father was having his breakdowns and he needed to have refuge there. And so he was her first priority. And so when he came, I mean, she wanted us to all unite, but I couldn't get over my hurt with my dad because he had gone too far too many times in letting me down or in hurting me. So even though his hurt was always with disregard, it was being ignored, it was being invisible, it was being passed over for some other moment or some other purpose or some other, like, just not the priority. Right? And I was too angry with him for all of that to even consider living in the same place with him. It was just nope. And I wanted to demonstrate to everybody concerned, including my granny, just how determined I was to not put myself anymore into these situations where someone else's problems could upend my life. Right? And I think that's pretty wise. And I kind of still believe that. I'm getting closer to forgiving him. I can feel it coming and I'm mad about it. So I avoid it as much as I can. But I am involved in art right now about my dad with my father's inner child at heart. And then there's too much understanding of his background now that I can't hate him. I'm mad at him, but I don't hate him. I don't. I love him dearly. But he's a messed up person, maybe still, probably still. And I'm trying this boundary thing, right? Yeah. Don't I have enough on my plate right now? Probably. But, you know, we're getting to an age where if I'm going to take care of my old man, which I'm not, I'm going to have to check up on him just to be sure that he's okay. All right. So I worked there for about 2 years. Again, a service job. And I've talked about the value in that. And then my fourth job before becoming a mother was as a receptionist. And I chose that work because I needed to sit down. I couldn't stand up all the time anymore. I just couldn't do it. I was 18. I worked there for about 2 years, and then I became a young mom. All right, so that's my early work history before children and the complete turnaround becoming an educator, which for me was the exact moment that I became a mother. I became also an educator. My child was born in distress. I was in shock. He had many disabilities, lots of problems, and I immediately grew up right then and there. Okay, you'll get that story. You'll get that story another time. I'm working on it.